Okay, let's unpack this. If you're like us, always seeking to understand the world better and cut through the noise, well, you might appreciate resources like Mind Expansion Daily to get great information such as this. Today, we're doing our own deep dive into a profoundly important and frankly challenging subject, the global landscape of child protection laws. Our journey today is to try and illuminate the intricate cracks within what we're calling the fractured shield. You know, how global laws meant to protect children from sexual abuse often fall short. They fall short because of this patchwork of contradictions, persistent loopholes, and, yeah, deeply ingrained cultural disparities. Our mission, really, is to explore where its defenses crumble and what that truly means for the most vulnerable among us.
And it really is a stark patchwork in 2025. It reveals some significant vulnerabilities. What's striking, I think, is the wild variation we see across jurisdictions. I mean, from shockingly low ages of consent that barely registers protection to extremely punitive measures like surgical castration for perpetrators. And we're also confronting completely new challenges, things emerging from the digital frontier.
Ah, the online aspects.
Exactly, where rapidly advancing tech creates these unprecedented forms of exploitation. And kind of paradoxically, alongside these new threats, you still have outdated statutes of limitations continuing to deny justice to survivors, often decades after the abuse occurred. So our goal in this deep dive is to help you navigate and understand what truly matters in this incredibly complex legal landscape. With the ultimate aim, really, of shining a light on how we might collectively work towards ensuring no child is left unprotected.
It's hard to protect children if we can't even agree on who a child is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that fundamental definition seems to be where this fractured shield first begins to splinter.
That's a great point.
The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC, that's the global standard bearer here. It's been ratified by, what, an impressive 196 countries.
Yeah, almost universal.
And it clearly states that anyone under 18 is considered a child. That really should be a universal baseline, a clear, unified line in the sand for protection.
It absolutely should be, but that's precisely where this dangerous legal maze comes in. Despite the UNCRC's near universal ratification, national laws just deviate significantly. It creates what amounts to a global free-for-all, really. You'd expect consistency, especially on something so fundamental, but the age of consent, the age someone can legally agree to sexual activity, it varies dramatically.
Dramatically, are we talking?
Well, for instance, it's as low as 11 in Nigeria. Just think about that. 11.
Wow.
Contrast that with 16 in the UK and Canada. Then you have countries like Germany, Italy, and Angola where it's 14. We did see a significant positive change in the Philippines. Until 2022, they had one of the lowest consent ages globally, just 12.
12.
Yeah, but thankfully they raised it to 16 after a lot of public outcry and advocacy. And then there were these alarming, deeply troubling exceptions, like in parts of Yemen where consent doesn't even hinge on age at all. It hinges on marriage.
On marriage.
Yes. Which effectively enables child marriages that completely skirt any abuse laws. It leaves very young children utterly exposed.
So, just to be clear, in some parts of Yemen, even a very young child could be considered to consent if they are married, regardless of their actual age.
That's exactly right. It's a devastating loophole.
How does that fundamentally undercut protections? And what are some of the most, alarming examples of how these varying definitions play out in the real world?
Well, these wildly differing definitions don't just create legal confusion, they actively empower perpetrators. They exploit these legal gaps. What we see is effectively a kind of forum shopping for abuse, where individuals might cross borders to commit acts that are legal in one place but criminal just next door.
Right, making enforcement a nightmare.
Exactly. Makes international cooperation and extradition incredibly difficult for law enforcement. Take Turkey, for example. Back in 2016, their constitutional court made a ruling that struck down a law classifying all sexual acts with children under 15 as abuse.
Why did they do that?
Their argument was that the law failed to differentiate adequately between toddlers and older teens. Now, tougher laws did follow later, but that initial decision sent shockwaves. It effectively created a period where a significant loophole for abuse existed, and it attracted global condemnation. And it's not just historical stuff. A 2025 X post highlighted ongoing deep concerns in Nigeria. That 11-year-old consent age still leaves young girls incredibly vulnerable to exploitation, under the guise of consent.
That's a staggering point. It really highlights how these inconsistent definitions just erode the very foundation of universal child protection, leaving these gaping holes in what should be a unified shield.
Absolutely. It creates situations where children in some regions are left with minimal protection, while others enjoy more robust safeguards. It's truly a global system with inherent exploitable weaknesses.
So, okay, once a perpetrator is identified and convicted, the next hurdle emerges. How do societies respond? And this is where the global approach becomes particularly stark and, well, for many, deeply contentious. We're talking about a spectrum of measures, right? From traditional imprisonment to some extremely controversial interventions, like castration.
Yeah, this is indeed a particularly sensitive and morally complex area. Let's talk about surgical castration first. In February 2024, Madagascar passed a law mandating it for those convicted of raping children under 10.
Mandating it.
Yes, this came in response to an alarming surge, over 600 cases reported just in 2023. The justice minister there publicly stated his view that it's a necessary, powerful deterrent. But on the flip side, Amnesty International has strongly condemned it as cruel and inhuman, saying it violates international human rights standards. And perhaps closer to home for some listeners, Louisiana became the first U.S. state in August 2024 to allow judicially ordered surgical castration for crimes against children under 13.
First U.S. state.
Then there's chemical castration, which is different. It's a reversible process that reduces testosterone. This is used in countries like Poland and South Korea, and also in U.S. states like California and Florida.
So with these measures, you clearly have strong arguments on both sides. Proponents often argue, look, these methods significantly reduce recidivism. There's that 2018 South Korean study, for example, that showed, a 15% reoffense rate for chemically castrated offenders compared to 40% for others.
That's the one.
That's a compelling statistical difference if you're seeking a practical solution to a horrifying problem. However, critics vehemently question both the efficacy and, crucially, the ethics of these procedures. They argue these measures prioritize retribution over actual rehabilitation.
Right.
And they express deep concern that resources might be diverted from crucial victim support services, which they believe should really be the primary focus.
And this really highlights a global divide, doesn't it? Where different cultures weigh justice, punishment, and human rights in really distinct ways.
Yeah.
You can see the public debate playing out intensely. We saw a 2025 X post debating Louisiana's new law. About 52% of users supported it for heinous crimes, but a substantial 38% called it a slippery slope to state overreach, a violation of bodily autonomy.
A real split.
Yeah, and this raises an important question, right? How do societies balance the pursuit of justice and deterrence with fundamental human rights and ethical considerations? It's a debate that pits deeply held moral principles against a desperate need to protect children. There's really no easy answer here, and the implementation of these policies reflects profound societal values.
And as if these legal complexities weren't enough, the digital world, as you mentioned, has introduced entirely new dimensions to child exploitation, creating just unprecedented challenges for enforcement. We're seeing this alarming new threat emerging, AI-generated child sexual abuse material, or CSAM.
Yeah, AI-generated CSAM.
These images are hyper-realistic, often terrifyingly so, and they are frequently trained on real abuse data sets. The chilling part, almost philosophical, is that they don't require direct physical harm to a child in their creation, yet the exploitation is profound. They contribute to and fuel the demand for real abuse. It pushes our fractured shield to its absolute limits.
It absolutely does. It forces legal systems to account to a crime where physical harm isn't directly involved in the creation, yet the exploitation is profound and, as you say, fuels demand for real abuse. And authorities are trying desperately to respond to this novel threat. Europol, in early 2025, conducted an operation leading to 25 global arrests, specifically for distributing AI-generated CSAM.
Okay, so they are catching people.
They are. It demonstrates the scope of this emerging problem. The EU, for its part, is actively drafting laws to criminalize this kind of material, and also pedophile handbooks that instruct on grooming. They've proposed severe penalties, up to 7 years in prison for those involved.
But of course, these efforts to combat online abuse immediately run into that inherent tension, right, between child safety and digital privacy rights.
Yeah. Always.
Think about the EU's proposed chat control regulation. That plan controversially thought to scan encrypted messages on platforms like WhatsApp before they were sent, looking for CSAM.
A hugely controversial idea.
Yeah, a move critics warned could compromise the very essence of private communication by undermining end-to-end encryption. It was, however, rejected by the European Parliament in 2025. Critics, like the president of Signal, warned it amounted to mass surveillance. Even a Polish compromise, sort of a voluntary scanning idea, that also failed. leaving the EU kind of deadlocked on how to proceed without sacrificing fundamental privacy.
It's a real dilemma, and public sentiment is very divided. A 2025 X poll showed 65% of users prioritizing privacy over mandatory scanning. Yeah, it reflects that ongoing tension between security and civil liberties. If we connect this to the bigger picture, lawmakers are truly struggling. They're trying to adapt existing legal frameworks and craft effective enforcement mechanisms against online abuse, while also upholding crucial civil liberties. This challenge is only compounded as AI tech rapidly advances and new forms of digital exploitation emerge almost daily. It's a constant cat and mouse game.
Okay, now let's talk about something that often quietly blocks survivors from seeking justice, essentially leaving them unprotected years later. I'm talking about statutes of limitations. These laws typically require survivors to report abuse within, say, a few years of turning 18. Which sounds reasonable on the surface? Maybe. But when you look deeper, it becomes a huge problem. Another significant crack in a fractured shield.
Absolutely. The core problem is that trauma, particularly the profound trauma of child sexual abuse, can delay disclosure for decades. A 2023 study found that a staggering 60% of survivors only report abuse after age 30.
60%.
After
Yeah, 30.
Yes. Which is often long past those legal deadlines. Imagine a survivor finally finding the courage to speak out, only to be told, sorry, it's too late. The legal window for justice has closed.
Devastating.
It really is. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child even criticized Argentina's restrictive time limits in 2024, explicitly stating that they protect perpetrators rather than victims. It's a fundamental flaw in this system. It prioritizes legal expediency over a survivor's lifelong journey of healing and seeking justice.
But there is encouraging progress being made in reform efforts, thankfully. New York's 2019 Child Victims Act, for instance. That opened a one-year look-back window for civil lawsuits, allowing survivors to file regardless of when the abuse occurred.
A landmark piece of legislation.
Yeah, that groundbreaking act led to over 10,000 filings, finally giving some people a chance at justice after decades of silence. Spain, building on this momentum, extended its statute of limitations to age 35 in 2021. That's a significant step forward. And incredibly, 15 EU countries have gone even further, completely eliminating criminal statutes of limitations for these types of crimes, recognizing that the impact on victims is lifelong.
Right. And the EU is actively pushing for a directive to abolish these limits across all member states, aiming for a unified, survivor-centric approach. Advocates are unequivocal, arguing, and I quote, "A life sentence for victims demands lifelong justice." This push reflects a growing understanding of trauma-informed justice. However, it's crucial to note, many regions, including parts of Asia, Latin America, they still retain these short deadlines, which unfortunately continue to deny survivors recourse and effectively shield perpetrators from accountability. The legal system in these cases often fails to account for the psychological realities of trauma. It inadvertently protects those who inflict harm.
So what does this all mean when we look at the broader cultural context, where tradition can sometimes clash profoundly with protection? It's not just about what's written down in law books, is it? It's also about how existing cultural norms often exacerbate legal gaps and create additional vulnerabilities for children, further widening the cracks in our fractured shield.
Oh, absolutely. These cultural and legal loopholes are stark and frankly devastating. For
Yeah.
example, laws in some countries, like parts of Iraq and Syria as of 2025, shockingly allow rapists to avoid punishment simply by marrying their victims.
Marrying their victims to avoid punishment.
Yes. This isn't merely a loophole. It's a systemic failure where legal frameworks are actively subverted by deeply ingrained cultural norms. It essentially grants legal impunity for abusers. Then there are child marriage laws, still prevalent in places like Yemen and Bangladesh. Girls as young as 9 can be wed with parental consent.
9 years old.
Yeah. This directly undermines any age of consent protections that might technically exist on paper, because marriage becomes a legal cover for what is effectively abuse. A 2025 UNICEF report estimates that a devastating 12 million girls are married annually before they turn 18 globally. These deeply rooted traditions tragically enable abuse to occur under legal cover, making them some of the most difficult challenges to address effectively. It requires profound societal shifts alongside legal reform.
So we've explored this idea of a fractured shield, this global framework for child protection that, as we've seen, is just riddled with inconsistent definitions, sometimes extreme and controversial punishments, complex digital challenges, and these outdated statutes of limitations that deny justice. It's a truly disheartening picture in many ways.
Yes, and looking at 2025, we see a really mixed bag. Progress and persistent challenges. On the positive side, you have the EU's push for uniform standards, certain U.S. states adopting harsher penalties and look-back windows. That signals some real steps forward, often driven by survivor advocacy. But the persistent challenges are significant. Those shockingly low consent ages in countries like Nigeria and Angola, they remain, creating huge vulnerabilities. AI-generated CSAM is a rapidly evolving threat that complicates enforcement, and the privacy debates continue to stall solutions that could protect children online. The widespread public frustration is palpable. Just look at X posts. You see users stating things like, "How is 11 a legal age of consent anywhere? It's 2025." And that sentiment resonates globally.
Yeah, you can feel that frustration. Ultimately, the urgent call here is for true global cooperation, isn't it? We need to align laws with the UNCRC standard, prioritize child safety above all else over cultural or political barriers. It's about bridging these divides and ensuring that every child, everywhere, receives the same fundamental protection.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think the question for us all to ponder is this. In a world that's increasingly connected, why do such fundamental protections remain so fragmented? And even more importantly, what responsibility do we all share in advocating for a truly unified shield for every single child with absolutely no exceptions?